Thank you, Josh. It is time for me. Hi. Hi again. I'm going to sort of continue from last week's conversation, and we're going to maybe just go a little deeper into the founding of unity and I guess what I would consider the deepest teachings of unity, and that is the idea of prayer and healing. And for those that don't know, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore founded Unity in the late 1800s. And it was Myrtle, actually, that was the springboard, if you will, for Unity. It wasn't Charles. Charles was very skeptical. But it was actually Myrtle that was the first, and I use this word loosely, believer in what was possible. And so Myrtle had tuberculosis, and she was in her 40s at this time, and had given up any idea that there was any solution out there. And she attended a workshop with E.B. Weeks, who was a student of Emma Curtis Hopkins, who was teaching sort of, for lack of a better term, science of mind type principles. And she heard in that workshop, first of all, she thought that E.B. Weeks was talking directly to her. That this was like nobody else was in the room, this was just for her. And what he said was, as a child of God, you cannot inherit sickness. And she believed that, like just fully embraced it as if that was absolute truth. And so what I'm going to share today, I'm going to be reading from some of Myrtle's book, How to Let God Help You. I like that it's not go to God and ask for help. It's actually just how to let God help you. And so what I also invite all of us to do, and I have to do this all the time, is remind myself of what the word God could mean for anybody that's hearing that word. And so I invite you to, whatever that means to you, if it's universe or creator or any other form, pure energy, just make that word mean that. I'm going to use it because that's what is in her book. And we also have to go back to, this is like early 1900s language in the Midwest of the United States, Bible Belt. So the idea that God is the Father is in the language. But I believe that if they were around today, that language would be updated. They wouldn't be speaking in those terms. So just give me some rope here, if you will, and make up your own words for those sayings, if that's a struggle for you. So Myrtle starts off with, I have made what seems to be a discovery. I was very sick. I had all the ills of mind and body that I could bear. Medicine and doctors ceased to give me relief, and I was in despair. This is how I made what I call my discovery. I was thinking about life. Life is everywhere. It's in animals and in people. Then I thought, well, why doesn't the life in the animal make a body like a human's? I asked. Then I thought, the animal does not have as much intelligence as the human. Its intelligence as well as life is needed to make a body. So here is the key to my discovery. Life has to be guided by intelligence in making all forms. The same laws work in my own body. Life is simply a form of energy, and it has to be guided and directed in a person's body by his or her intelligence. And how do we communicate intelligence? By thinking and talking, of course. Then it flashed upon me that I might talk to the life in every part of my body and have it do just what I wanted. So I began to teach my body and got marvelous results. So it's interesting to me that at this point in the early 1900s, that this is the conversation that's kind of developing in what you might call the New Thought movement, and that Charles and Myrtle began to adopt this. Now again, Charles was very skeptical and was attended that conference as well, or that workshop, but was like, yeah, I'll wait and see if this actually works. But Myrtle was all in. So she goes on to say that I began to teach my body. I told the life in my liver that it was not torpid or inert, but full of vigor and energy. I told the life in my stomach that it was not weak or inefficient, but energetic, strong, and intelligent. I told the life in my abdomen that it was no longer infested with ignorant ideas of disease put there by myself and by doctors. Put there by myself and by doctors. Well, when I hear that, I think immediately of course, there's the things we say to ourselves about ourselves, which how often are they unkind, or how often have they been unkind in the past? But then there's also what we take on from other people. I think in the Four Agreements, it's referred to as the dream of the planet, the environment in which we're raised in, the consciousness of where we live, what we're watching on television, what we're allowing into our stream of consciousness begins to shape our thoughts and our perceptions and our projections going forward, and we might begin to live into things that really aren't our truth. And so I think that's a great recognition that these were ideas put in her head by not only herself but others, and needed to focus on that. And one of the things I love to say is that we can change our lives, but first we need to notice. We actually need to take notice of what is happening. What are those thoughts? What are those feelings that we're having? Who are we listening to and hanging out with? I told my limbs that they were active and strong. I told my eyes that they did not see of themselves, but that they expressed the sight of spirit, and that they were drawing on an unlimited source. I told them that they were young eyes, clear, bright eyes, because the light of God shone through them. I told my heart that the pure love of the Christ flowed in and through its beatings, and that all the world felt its joyous pulsation. I went to all the life centers in my body and spoke words of truth to them, words of strength and power, and I asked their forgiveness for my foolish words and thoughts. Can you imagine going through your entire body and asking forgiveness from all of your organs, limbs, life centers, nervous center, energy centers, for ever thinking badly upon them? You know, how many people here have said, hey, I've got a bad back? Seems simple, right? But we're actually reinforcing something within ourselves by just the simple words, I have a bad back. And then you tell people that how many times in a day? Might you say that to somebody? Right? Or I've got a bummed knee, you know, good English term. Oh, I've got a bummed knee, right? Like, so then your knee actually takes on being that, and we reinforce that, and we reinforce that. Now, I do want to pause and just say sometimes the body is too far gone. Sometimes there are genetics that happen that things can't be just from our own thinking rearranged within us. And there are also many examples of people that have overcome great illness, great difficulty in their lives through the changing of their thoughts and their feelings. And I think what we also need to look at is when we talk about healing, it's not just sickness. It's the healing of our relationships, the healing of our beliefs, the healing of all parts of our entire system of being alive. That's what's available. And so it's really incumbent upon each of us to decide, well, what is in my life that's not working? Maybe it is your back, but maybe it is your relationship with your kids or your loved ones or your family or a close friend that you had for many years, and there's a divide there. Maybe it's your relationship with your view on politics. Or maybe it's your view of how the country is being run. Or maybe it's your view of how somebody could do whatever it is better than what they are. This is the places to look. It's not out there. It's never out there. It's always here is the place to look and to see and to notice. Myrtle goes on to say, I did not become discouraged at their being slow to wake up, but kept right on, both silently and aloud, declaring words of truth until the organs responded. And neither did I forget to tell them that they were free, unlimited spirit. Yeah, they were free, unlimited spirit. I told them that they were no longer in bondage to the carnal mind, our thinking mind, our simple thoughts. They're no longer in bondage to that. That they were not corruptible flesh, but centers of life and energy omnipresent. Imagine taking that on for yourself, even just once a week, let alone every day, and being consistent with it every day. And she says it didn't happen overnight. It took time. So that tells me that that's a practice, right? That becomes a practice. Whether it's a meditation practice or a prayer practice or going into the silence or humming or chanting, whatever it is, that is a practice that one takes on to shift what they want to shift in their life. I did not let any worried or anxious thoughts into my mind, and I stopped speaking gossipy, frivolous, petulant, angry words. Anybody here guilty of... No, right? Not at Unity. No. Nobody here has ever said a terrible thing about anybody or themselves or any... perfect example, yesterday I went to Vancouver for my oldest brother's birthday. And the service was not exemplary. And it was an expensive restaurant. And I had moments where I was quite upset with the fact that you would bring me a dessert without a fork. Like, if I went to, if I went to a lower level restaurant or a lower cost restaurant, it's like, that's cool. But I'm thinking for a high-end restaurant, you're probably trained, or maybe you should be, and maybe that's my problem, is I thought you should be trained, that when you bring out a plate of a dessert or something, you bring a utensil with you because you've just cleared all the utensils off the table. Anyhow, so I went through this moment of, and then had to check myself and go, really, it's a fork. Come on, have some patience here. And then, so I was on my motorcycle yesterday, and I don't really love riding at night, but there's no ferries between 6:20 p.m. and 10:45 p.m. coming back to Nanaimo. And so I was wrestling with the idea that I would not make a 6:20, so I'd have to take the 10:45 and ride from downtown or Kitsilano all the way out to Horseshoe Bay. And not thinking yesterday, I forgot to bring a safety vest to put over top. So instead I had black rain gear on my motorcycle, right? So I was angry with myself for how could you be so, right, whatever word you want to put in there. So again, another opportunity to see how I speak now to myself about myself. And then I got to the ferry for a 10:45 ferry, and it was 55 minutes late. So I had another opportunity to curse all of the entire ferry system, and why do I live on this island, and this is stupid. So you see how easy we can get caught into the trappings of being upset or causing or looking at others as being responsible for our lot in life, when in actual fact, the person that decided to go to this birthday event was me. So therefore, everything that transpired is really my responsibility, is it not? I put myself in that situation for all sorts of things to happen and show up, and now I have to deal with them. And so how do I deal with them is the question that we get to ask. How am I going to process this? How am I going to deal with this? What am I going to say? or not say. Maybe the best thing to do is to be quiet sometimes. Anybody thought of that at any time? Is it? Yes. I found that in gaining a victory over my fears, I had lessened the liability of my children to take on old conditions. Ooh. Where was that when I started parenting? Right? Feeding. What are we feeding the young people today? What are we passing on to them that they are then going to have to end up in a Unity Center later in life getting therapy from some minister who read a book, right? Like, where is that going to roll into? So there had been a gradual giving way of the old established ideas as we have steadfastly made room for the higher order of living. This is her speaking about what's now happening in her house. And I have to read this. Do not think that it was always a pathway of roses, or that my head was continually above the clouds. We had many trying tests, reverses of fortune, apparent loss of friends, humiliations of many kinds, and what seemed to be serious illness in the family. But through it all, we held unwavering to the principles that we caught sight of in that first lesson, and we have proved beyond a doubt that God is a help in every time of need. And I really hear that as getting back to truth, to allowing yourself to heal with the new understanding that you might have, that there is a way that I can process something. And again, it always begins with noticing. Because if we don't notice, how can we change? Right? How can we change? And so when something doesn't work out in our lives, when something isn't working, when problems happen, I have found that over the last 5 years, the best thing for me to do is to start right here and say, well, what am I feeling from this? What am I experiencing? How did this get here? Like, what happened that had me be right where I am right now, where this is now in my life? I mean, I could stand here right now and say, how did I end up right here, right now? It's not anybody else's doing, but I could quickly see that there was a move through different ways of being, through different ideas, through different conversations, through different people in my life that led me on a path where I said yes to certain things, no to certain things, and that has me being here. And I'll bet if you did that with your life, whatever it is, you could trace that. You know those images that you get where it's all numbered and you have to draw the line on the page, and that's pretty much it, right? You could see exactly where your life is today. And here's what's beautiful about Unity teaching is that that's great, and it doesn't have to be the future, right? It's like that is, we can leave that all behind us, and we can forget about how the future might look and just be right now exactly where you are and experience it for all of the amazingness that it is, all of the challenge that it might be, and say, okay, now what? With what's right in front of me right now what? And you get to answer that. Sometimes it's hard though, right? Because then there's all these other responsibilities that we might have already taken on. Maybe we've committed to things through our language or talking to others that we've said, hey, I'll do this or I'll do that. So now we've got some wrestling to do with that. But sometimes you might have to break those arrangements, those agreements. And we can do that gracefully. We can break agreements if we need to. If that is what is best for us in those moments, it's okay to be responsible. Myrtle says, I think that I am qualified to say that health and harmony are possible in any home where either one or both of the parents make a compact with the ever-present and eternal goodness. Compact is an agreement, where we can actually make an agreement. So it doesn't need to be everybody in the home needs to be on board. It only takes one. When I signed up to be a Unity minister, many of you might not know this, Leslie had to write a letter to Unity to let them know that she was aware that I was taking on being a minister and that she was okay with it, because I was going to disturb the household. And it's true. When I came back from my being accepted into ministry, when I went to Unity Village and I went through the process of being interviewed by 3 separate ministerial groups, and I had to do a 90-minute psychological exam, and then another hour, 90-minute meeting one-on-one with a psychologist to, answer these questions to get behind all these questions that I answered. When I came back, I was in a very dark, I have to say, I was in a very dark state. I actually flew from Kansas City to Seattle, huddled up against the window of the plane, crying the whole way home. I'm not kidding. I was I was a mess. And I thought later, as I sort of, recovered from that, I thought later, the poor soul that was sitting next to me the whole way must have felt that energy, right? That just like, who is this guy? What is going on in his life that he is just a puddle over there? I was trying to keep it under wraps as much as possible. But anyhow, I get home, and it's about 3 weeks later, Leslie finally says to me, and I think she used these terms, "Dude, if this is you in ministry, I'm out." Because I was just this dark soul wandering around the house, completely a mess with what I had decided to do with my life. Because it is, like, whenever you decide to do something, if you decide to go to a workshop, if you decide to go to a retreat of some kind, the moment you make that decision, it begins to work in you. I truly believe that. It begins to do its work. So that stuff had begun, and really it culminated in being accepted into it. And that's where it really hit, like, wow, there's a mess here that I've got to deal with. There's a lot of stuff that I have to process. Whatever may seem the lack or need in the home, the supply is at hand. God's world is crammed full of health. If it's health you want, say so. God's universe is overflowing with unfailing substance. I love that. There's just like, that is abundant supply, is it not? It's full of exactly what we want. I think there's a scripture that Jesus said, it's the Father's great pleasure to give you the kingdom. That's what that means to me, that we have this available to us, readily available to us, whenever we want to flip that switch and move in that direction. And that's why I say sometimes maybe we need to break old agreements, because they're no longer serving us. We found something new for ourselves, and things might need to be left behind in some way. And I'm not saying you go home and end your marriage or, anything like that. Kick your kids out of the house. That's not what I'm saying. But sometimes there's things we might need to shift in our lives and move away from. And it's hard to do, I get it. It's really hard to do. The idea of substance, and I'll wrap up because I could go on for quite a while here, and I know I've been up here for a while, so I'll wrap up soon. But this idea of substance reminds me of, and I brought this up before, the science of getting rich. There is this thinking stuff from which all things are made, and which in its original state permeates and penetrates and fills the interspaces of the universe. A thought in this substance produces the thing that is imaged by the thought. Everything here, this building we're in, this microphone, all of this stuff was once a thought, an idea in somebody's head that then got moved into something in form. And that's really what the core of unity is really about, is this idea that we have the ability to take our thoughts and move them into form in the world as we go forward. And that's why it's so important to be on top of our thoughts, to be on top of the words that we speak, the energy that we put out into the world. It is, for me, the most critical thing that I can do with my life, is to be really crystal clear about what I'm thinking and what I'm saying. And I miss the mark all the time. But it doesn't mean I can't keep working at it. As Myrtle said, it took a lot of work. It wasn't overnight that this change happened in her life. And they went on to build unity. That's never what they intended. There's nothing that I've read where they got together and said, hey, let's get married, have a few kids, and we'll build unity. That was not in their marriage agreement. It just happened and continued to flow out of them as they deepened their connection and as they allowed themselves to move forward into that direction. And it changed their lives, obviously. They went from, Charles went from selling real estate to, building unity ministry with Myrtle alongside. And so Myrtle wrote a lot of letters. So if you look at what Myrtle did mostly, Charles wrote a lot of books. He was very much in the analytical side. Myrtle was much more of the heart center of unity, I would say. And so she responded to people with letters. And I think there is a book that is out there of Myrtle's letters that you can read. People were saying, how did you do this? How did you do that? How do I do this? How do I do that? And she would respond to them. And that was really the ministry that she did. And Charles' ministry was much more of the revealing word and breaking down the metaphysical Bible and, really digging into the stuff on an analytical basis. So here's what Charles said about substance. Substance is the divine idea of the underlying reality of all things. That is what substance is. It's everywhere present, pervades all things, and inspires to action. So we can get in. Have you ever been inspired to do something? Yeah, that's what that is, right? That's that inspire to action. But nothing happens unless we act, right? It doesn't, we can't sit on the sofa and, make a shelf. It's not going to happen. Well, that's not true, because we could actually pick up a phone, which might be right beside us now because it never used to be, but it might be right there. We could actually call somebody, as I did earlier this week, and I'm looking at Gilles, as I said, shelf, because I said, hey, Gilles, we need some shelves in the room over here, and Gilles was like, yeah, okay. So you can actually do it on the sofa. I take all of that back. Yeah. So we're going to move into meditation shortly. I think I'll leave us with this. And this is from Myrtle, a state of health is a condition of wholeness, completeness, entireness. The word holy is from the same root as the word heal. Holiness and health, in their root significance, are the same and are a state of wholeness. And if you've heard me before, I've lived by the standard that we are all whole and complete. There's nothing wrong with us. We're not broken. We don't need to be fixed by anybody. We are whole and complete, exactly the way we are. And maybe there's something we want different in our lives, and that's what we get to choose. And then we, if we want that, it's incumbent upon us to do what's required to have that difference in our lives. And that's really all it is. It's making choices, choosing the wide path or the narrow one. And it's usually the narrow one that is the one that is our truth. That's who we are, individuals. We get to choose that.